Hello, America. Welcome to the Junto Podcast, where we promote the practical applications of critical thinking and bold creativity. I am your host, Edgar Mills. Thanks for joining us. Hello, good people. Welcome to episode 43. And today, we're going to be talking about a subject that was suggested to me from one of my listeners or followers. And it was a brilliant suggestion because it's a brilliant follow-up to the last episode 42, talking about harmonious dissent. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about the non-aggression principle and all about it. And what does it mean and where did it come from and all these things and how does it apply? The non-aggression principle, and I know it's ironic a little bit coming from me. I know this. I would say I was a lot of things in my life, aggressive being one of those things. However, when we're talking about adult life and business and politics and interacting with other humans out in the world, we have to grow up a little bit, and everything's not about going to knuckles, you know. So the non-aggression principle. And what is it? Don't initiate force against other people or property. And the only instance where it's okay to use force is in self-defense. Well, generally speaking, I just described every rule of engagement for cops and soldiers and everything else. It's not okay to initiate force except in self-defense. Now, we'll talk about as it applies to law enforcement a little later, but and that's very broad and generic sounding. I get it, and we'll go into it. The roots, okay, well, you guys know John Locke, right? He was a historic figure, philosopher from, I think, the 1700s, and he wrote Common Sense. Yeah, he wrote Common Sense. But the non-aggressive principle comes from essentially, well, you can trace it back further, but I think for the modern day, we can start with John Locke. And what he basically laid out to us was that individuals have a right to life, liberty, and property, and shouldn't violate other individuals' right to life, liberty, or property. So, yeah, that's it. And then in the more modern day, right, the 20th century, we're talking about mostly libertarians who espouse this idea. Now, Democrats will say they hold this idea to be true as well, and some Republicans maybe, but not really. I want to say somewhere around, well, the Libertarian Party was formed, I want to say in 1972 or 73. And the non-aggression principle has always been a piece of that platform. But it also comes heavily from Austrian economic sort of ideology as well, that really, really hammers on government-initiated, force and coercion. Now, as far as the economics go, they look at any government coercion of economic policy as just that, coercion. And that's in violation of this non-aggression principle. And one of my favorites, Ayn Rand, she espoused the non-aggression principle through objectivism. And rational self-interests is what we all chase after, so far as we do not initiate force against other humans. Our rational self-interest cannot infringe upon someone else's rational self-interest. Otherwise, it's not rational, it's irrational. So it's basically a foundation for the libertarianism, and as politics goes, the party of the Libertarian Party, this is a platform point there. And aggression is just violence. And this includes the government, right? The government holds a sort of a monopoly on violence, does it not? let's say you don't pay your taxes, and then at some point the IRS chooses to initiate action against you as far as collecting money goes, but you don't have the money. You didn't pay the taxes because you didn't have the money. And now that you can't pay the taxes that are owed, at some point, maybe a sheriff or someone, or maybe an IRS agent, I don't know, they're going to come knocking on your door. And they're going to look to start taking your stuff. And if you ain't got no stuff to take, they're going to look at start taking you. Well, that's force. And it all seems perfectly legal, I guess, but it's still a violation of the non-aggression principle by the government. Yeah. Fraud, theft, coercion, that's all violations of the non-aggression principle because they undermine your autonomy. They do. Yep. So again, the Libertarian Party has been promoting this from the get-go. And places like the Mises Institute and the Cato Institute, they advanced the non-aggression principle through, various articles and books and things like seminars and all these things. And it applies. You can apply the non-aggression principle to every piece of our life. And there's, I'm at a loss for words right now. I don't know if the principle, is it, I don't want to say it's a libertarian principle. It should be a humanistic principle. Now, I know there's aggressive people out there. And like I said, I was an aggressive guy, but institutionally, and for every institution, business, government, if we practice this, then we'd probably have much smoother interactions with other humans and other businesses and other organizations. We'll get into ethics here in a little bit when we start talking about that. But as far as politics goes, I don't want to sit and loiter around politics this whole episode here, but we got to start with that because, like I said, government seems to have a monopoly on violence. So we want to talk about that. At local levels, the non-aggression principle applies to politics when you're doing things at the grassroots local level, like, let's talk zoning laws, right? Kind of opposing or fighting zoning laws or property taxes. That's a big one these days. A lot of people are getting on the boat with like, hey, we need to abolish property tax. Because these things, like I said, taxes especially, they kind of force compliance without, really without consent. Yeah. And how do we get around that then? Well, if we didn't have zoning laws, Edgar, there'd be a shooting range on every corner. Nobody'd get. Well, you got to have sort of voluntary community interaction and agreements, right? Do you need the government to make that decision for you? Well, if it comes out on your side, then then the government was good. If it comes out against you, then the government was bad. But minus the government, we could come to some agreement. What about the state level? I've talked about this on different episodes, but I'll talk about it again. The non-aggression principle sort of challenges things like occupational licensing, right? We talked about that a hairstylist spends more time in school than a cop learning to do their job, and they have to be licensed to do it. Otherwise, you're kind of an outlaw there, right? You get shut down. So that's an argument that's force right there, sort of setting a high bar, a financial bar, essentially, for your entry into the workplace, the profession, right? Now, for me to be an instructor, I went to an instructor course in the military, which qualifies me to be an instructor for, anything really. But I have a couple of different instructor certifications from recognized organizations that qualify me to be an instructor. But do you really need that? I guess for somebody to feel comfortable initially with you, you do. But let's say, what if you wanted to open a barbershop, I guess in Rome? I got to imagine that you've got to show some well, one, business license. If you're in the city here in Rome, you got to have a business license. But I don't know. Do they check for your barber certificate? I'm not sure. They probably do. Or is there some barber governing body out there who, like a union, comes around and strong arm you if you're not licensed through them? I'm not sure. I got to ask my barber friends about that. Is there a barber union? You got some thugs that come around every so often. Make sure you're paying your dues. Unions, yeah, that's aggression. Paying union dues is a form of aggression. If you can't work unless you pay union dues, that's a form of aggression. Yep. What about federally? Well, one of the big things you hear on the Libertarian Party a lot is, I'm already against the next war. Yeah, that's physical. That's actual aggression, right? And the non-aggression principle is against any war that's sort of a non-defensive, type war, right? Like a lot of guys bemoan the capture of Maduro. Now, look, man, I'm a libertarian. I believe in a non-aggression principle, but I also happen to believe that Maduro should have been snatched up. I think that was a good and appropriate thing. Did it require congressional approval? That's nuanced stuff that I don't know about really. Yes, it probably should have had congressional approval, and maybe it did. Who knows really what went on behind closed doors there? But any military intervention, I don't know at what level is it okay to intervene militarily, and then governmentally speaking, are the people represented in that? Now, a lot of people don't think the general public is educated enough to have an opinion on that, really. And that's why we have representatives in government, but that ain't really, yeah. Are we a representative government? Yeah, we've got, I don't know, 500 and something people in Congress that are meant to represent us, but who knows really? And do they get a chance to speak up on that? I don't know. That's kind of one of the big debates right now, right? The tyranny of the executive branch versus the legislative branch versus the judicial branch. I don't know, man. But anyway, non-aggression on a national level, yeah, war, defense, right? Acting against a sovereign nation. Who knows? And then what about internationally? What's an application of the non-aggression principle? Well, what about free trade? What about tariffs and sanctions and things like that? Voluntary exchange between countries minus the sort of coercive policies. Yeah, man. Again, I have an opinion on everything, but as far as offering solutions, do I have a real solid solution? A lot of these tariffs and sanctions and these various things are used to affect policy in different ways and to affect different parts of policy. So do I think Cuba should have been embargoed for, decades and decades? I don't know. Yeah, the Cuban regime is a communist dictatorship who treats their citizens badly. Is that a thing for us to pass judgment on? I don't know. What about Saudi Arabia? They got the oil, so we trade with them. They still cut people's hands off and shit. So I don't know. I don't know the right answer on it. But generally speaking, in a political perspective, any coercive policy is a sort of a violation of non-aggression principle, because we're not just talking about physical aggression. We're talking about coercive aggression and various policies. And then from a very libertarian perspective, we're talking about non-aggression, right? Criminal justice reform, decriminalizing victimless crimes, drug policy, right? Decriminalizing a lot of drugs that, I don't know. I mean, I've got mixed feelings on that as well. but I want to say Portugal decriminalized most drugs, and their crime rate obviously went down. And then they spent a lot of effort and time in their mental health and their rehabilitation facilities, and I think that's working for them. Now, always be wary of comparing America to some other country. I mean, there's a lot of different variables there. Just the size of the population and things like that. Never mind the value system and the different. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff going on, so you can't always do a one-for-one comparison. But like I said, Portugal it works for them. Non-aggression principle, coercive policies. Never mind physical aggression and war. We're talking about coercive policies at all levels of the government. So now, I said this was a good follow-up episode to the last one, because now we're going to talk about non-aggression principle as it relates to law enforcement. Oh, yeah. And look, this is not to shit on cops at all. I think if we're going to shit on anybody, it needs to be the lawmakers first and then the enforcers. But limiting police action to literally defending against physical crimes against someone else, actual aggression, physical aggression, violence or theft. Yeah, that's pretty much it. All these weird policies, like you remember the stop and frisk thing up in New York, and just randomly cops could just stop anyone. Some people will say, well, there was some success there, but it led to immediate escalation. So now we're giving cops, via the law, we're giving cops some perceived authority that they may or may not actually have. And there's, I'd say, widespread. Now, I don't have numbers to back this up right in front of me, but there is abuse of power. And the power does go to some of the guys, to their brains there, especially the younger guys, I think. When you have all this perceived power and authority over individuals. And I've talked about this us or them mentality that some of the cops have. And they're saying us or them, and the them is the citizens. Folks, it shouldn't be cops against citizens. It just shouldn't. Right? So you may be thinking, well, Edgar, you're talking about Mayberry. You're talking about Andy, who's, yeah, well, maybe I am. And maybe that's a little bit unrealistic. And maybe there are criminals that would exploit, right? But we can deal with criminals who exploit this perceived, I don't know, it would be perceived as leniency, I'm sure. But I'm calling it just enforcing like critical laws, right? Cops should be there to protect people's rights and to stop violence, really. And I'm going to throw a thing out there, no-knock raids on somebody who has a warrant for who knows what. And it's only suspected that, there may be violent, or they may or may not be violent. I don't know. I've always disagreed with no-knock raids on American soil. Now, look, I've done 1 million no-knock raids on foreign soil, folks. Okay, not 1 million. A few hundred. Probably a few hundred over the course of my career. And that's not a thing that you want to see in American neighborhoods. And yeah, there may be violent criminals, but also, yeah, there may be innocent. And we saw that with the Breonna Taylor thing, and I've talked about that before. It's a recipe for disaster, and it's a recipe for violence, for escalation, without, with no clear need for that. So in the law enforcement space, non-aggression principle should be sort of a leading ethic there. And it's not right now, I know. And look, there's some people out there that would just as soon cut your throat as to have a conversation with you. And those people need to be dealt with aggressively. But we can't have the thought police, out cruising around because you wear a hoodie, or because you look a certain way, or because, hey, now just because I own a firearm and it's on my hip doesn't mean that that I deserve any kind of preemptive violence. And then other people talk about, and I mean, advocates of the non-aggression principle argue that tax-funded enforcement is coercive, in that it's forcing you to pay for somebody to come and violate your rights. I mean, it's a perspective. Whatever you think of it, it's a perspective that has to be given a little bit of credence. It has to be given a little bit of credence. Now, that leads us into privatized policing. Now, that's a hot button issue. Privatized policing. Then the incentive, I guess, would be what? The more crime creates more incentive for the cops. Is that? No, it's the opposite of that. Less crime would be more incentive for the cops, because they're getting paid based on the absence of crime. Now, how do you preempt? How do you? I don't know. We're getting into this is a big can of worms about preemptive policing and things like that. So we're not going to go down the rabbit hole. But yeah, there are people out there to argue that tax funded law enforcement is coercive, and that law enforcement should be a voluntary effort, a community effort, or private effort that sort of creates competition and eliminates the monopoly on force. Because right now, folks, as it is, like it or not, the state and the municipality has a monopoly on violence, and a lot of this qualified immunity stuff, they can get away with it, and they can sort of haphazardly go into a situation, screw it all up, accidentally shoot someone, kill someone, violate someone's rights, and then they can find some law that you were in violation of to make it, well, look, he had a gun, but he was also obstructing justice, so that's a commission of a felony. Well, having a gun and a commission of a felony warrants deadly force. You see, it's all so the law is very manipulative. The law is very manipulative. And yeah, cops and agencies and the lawyers in these agencies sit around to figure out how to, well, I could say, get around law or be in absolute compliance with law. Whereas you don't have that lawyer going, hey man, well, if you do this, you can get away with this, but if you do that, you can't, et cetera, et cetera. So you guys can see already how the non-aggression principle, as far as law enforcement goes, is very jinky. It's very jinky. What about in the system itself? Courts exist to enforce contracts, resolve disputes. When aggression occurs, they resolve that, right? And there should be, as far as punishment goes, right? How about restitution versus punishment? If a guy's in jail, he can't pay restitution or work off the restitution. So these state imposed penalties and these minimum sentencing things and laws and whatnot. Yeah, I guess when it comes to actual murder and things like that, sure. But as far as disputes among contracts and I guess even theft to a degree, I mean, we should be able to actually implement restitution a little more thoroughly and a little more thoughtfully versus just straight up punishment. Because look, even if a criminal goes to jail and then he's forced to pay X amount of money over the course of however many years, most of that money goes to the state because they're the middleman, like they're the one managing the money. And you as the victim, you're going to see only chump change on that. And I saw that in firsthand when we had a tenant who cost us a lot of money in Colorado. We sued and we won that case, but Ended up seeing a chunk change on that over the course of a few years. So it almost wasn't worth the effort. So people, if people who criticize the non-aggression principle, they criticize it based on kind of vagueness and like it's not really highly defined. And then aggression is kind of, how do you define aggression, right? Is it physical or is it coercion or things like that? And that's where all this legalese, that's where the legalese squeezes in, and then that's when it becomes more coercive, in my opinion. And then, as far as law enforcement and the use of force and how much force can an officer use versus, and we got proportionality, right? Like, and at what level does de-escalation has it played its course? And what if you have to, there's a lot of what ifs, right? All these situations are very different. Now, I believe that cops should be highly trained in de-escalation, and they should be highly trained in lethal force. Yeah, that's right. The more trained you are in lethal force, the more confident you are in the use of that force, and then, therefore, the less apt you are to jump straight to it because of uncertainty, I think. That's what I believe. Anyway, we can still have the non-aggression principle in law enforcement. Yeah, we can. Now, out there in the libertarian world, we have anarcho-capitalists, which, if you want to get absolutely technical, I would classify myself. I agree with the anarcho-capitalist principles more than most other variants of that. But yeah, ANCAPs want to replace state police with free market, private entities that go into a contract. You have to live up to a contract, and you're accountable to that contract. And then competing agencies can come along and try to outperform and outbid you, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how a lot of things are already. But for some reason, policing seems a bridge too far on that. Well, here's the thing, man. It's how much, what's in the contract? How much authority did you give them? At what point, if they violate that authority, can you terminate contract and go with your next vendor? And then at what point, if they are in violation of their contract, well, then they're at fault and possibly criminally negligent. Well, the company ain't going to roll up their own guy. Well, then you have a dispassionate third party who can enforce that. There can still be a municipality, folks. There can still be a city government who has the ultimate authority. Elected officials, elected officials, and they have the ultimate authority. Yeah, but the company's got all the guns. Well, guess what? Every American citizen has a right to own a gun. So if you structured that up just right, you wouldn't have that issue. All right, I'm going down a rabbit hole, kind of. I think there is a world where privatized policing can exist and in better harmony than institutional government policing. Yeah, I think that. All right, folks, we're going to shift gears. What about the non-aggression principle in your daily life or in your daily business interactions or whatever? That's easy, isn't it? I would say probably most people walk the earth adhering to the non-aggression principle. You respect other people's boundaries. For the most part, you respect other people's personal space. Most people avoid physical confrontations. Most. And most of the time, you resolve disputes through, some dialogue. Yeah. Hey, F you, hey, F you. That's an escalation right there, right? I got into a little road rage incident. A guy, I was driving aggressively, and a guy wanted to play the game where he shoots over in front of you to slow you down or to do whatever. And then he would get up, and he was driving in front of me, and then he would get up and then ride neck and neck with the car that was going slow, and then block the entire lane. And then traffic was piling up behind us, and then he would step on it and speed up to where if I passed him, it would be something ridiculous to where I'd have to. So, and then I would just get over into the right lane, and then he would get over and slow down. And at some point, it became where he got tired of playing the game, and as I pulled up to go around him, he was flipping me off, and F you. I could see we were going. So I flipped him off, but then he gave me the finger guns. Oh man. So I lost it. That was an escalation, and oh man, I got irate. And then in retrospect, I was like, man, that was madness, because what would have happened? He was a average white guy, 20 something, 30, maybe 30 something, and his wife was in the car with him. And I was like, man, what if we would have pulled over? What if I would have let the Hulk come out, and then I would have cut him off, pulled him over to the side of the road where he was forced to pull over, and then got out and said, "You got finger guns? Show me what you got." And then we would have had to go into a shootout because of road rage. You know what I mean? Because of aggression, raw aggression. So I almost immediately felt bad about that. And then the wife writes a thing on my business. Hey, this guy's crazy. And then I wrote back, and I was like, hey, I don't think me or him are very proud of that interaction, and I apologize for my part in it. And I offered them some free training. They didn't take me up on it, but the point is, if you take a moment to think about the logical progression of that aggression, it's not going to end well. Do I want to shoot a dude, a regular guy who is just being an asshole? Now, back in the day, I would have been happily thrown hands with the guy, right? Back in the day. And I might have taken an ass whooping, or I might have given one. I've taken many and given many. Right there on the side of the road. Then we both would have been charged with assault. You see the logical progression, right? Somebody would have called the cops. And then in this instance, probably the cops would have been there instantly, right? Like if somebody's breaking into your home, it takes 20 minutes for the cops to show up. If you're doing something wrong, it takes seconds for the cops to show up, in my experience. My point is this. Aggression will get you. It'll get you in trouble. And if you play out the progression, are you willing to go all the way? Are you willing to go all the way with it? Are you committed to that aggression? Some people are, man, and they don't care, and they'll go to jail, and they don't, whatever. I care. I don't want to go to jail. I got grandkids. I'm trying to be a good example for people. Not only my family, definitely my family, but, I got, there's people listening these days. I just posted on the Facebooks 10,000 downloads. Thank you so much for 10,000 downloads. I don't know if that's good or bad, but hey, man, it's pretty awesome to me. So that means there's 10,000 humans who've heard my voice, and so I'm trying to be an example, right? I'm trying to lead by example. I'm trying to be a good human, I'm trying to love Jesus, all these things. So yeah, aggression, if it plays out and you're, to the logical end, are you willing to go that far? And then what about property rights? Yeah. Trespassing on other people's property, stealing other people's property, destroying other people's property. Or if you're a hunter, you know what? I had some dudes come up and knock on my door in the beginning of hunting season. And they were on some other property and had shot a deer with a bow. And the deer came over. They tracked it onto my property. And instead of coming onto my property, they came to my front door, knocked on the door respectfully, stepped back off the door respectfully, and said, "Hey, here's what happened. Is it okay if we go look for the?" Yeah, right on, man. That was an execution of the non-aggression principle, whether they knew it or not. That was just good manners. A lot of people just call that good manners. But yeah, man, I thought that was very good of them because I'm very skeptical when people knock on my door, good people. I'm very, I'm not, I'm not crazy. You know what I mean? I'm not some kind of crazy paranoid dude. But if somebody knocks on my door unexpected, right? Because we don't live in like a neighborhood. We live kind of on a somewhat in a somewhat rural space. So when people knock on my door, it takes a lot of effort to knock on my door. It's 178 yards from my mailbox to my front door. So it takes effort. You've got to come up two very steep driveways on either side of. I got two, right? They split off at the bottom of the hill, and one comes to one side of the house, one goes to the other. Yeah, it takes effort to do that. You're deliberate. Once you get to the split in my driveway, whatever you're doing beyond that is deliberate. So, unless you're invited, I'm a little skeptical. But anyway, that's an example, right? That's a real-time example. Those guys came and asked permission to go on my property. And good, man. That's awesome, and that's what you're supposed to do. All right, we'll talk about business a little bit, but let's talk about small scale entrepreneurs like myself, because that's what I know, right? Every transaction, every interaction, it's voluntary, folks. I don't coerce people. I don't sell a bill of goods that I can't deliver on. I don't defraud people. I don't overcharge people. I don't present one thing on the socials and then deliver another thing in person. And as a small business guy, that's rational self-interest. You treat people fairly and with respect and honestly so that your business will grow and you build a good reputation for long-term trust and stuff like that, and a loyal customer base, and that kind of stuff, right? And as far as competition with other people, that competition in the market is very good. But check it out. That don't mean you can't still collaborate, right, man? I collaborate with several other instructor types who do the same things that I do and probably have had a crossover of customers. I'm not getting rich. They're not getting rich. And if I stomped on those dudes, would I get rich? And even so, would it be worth it? Would it be worth stomping someone else out? No, man. That's the non-aggression principle in action in business. Being a square dealer, right? And I'm transparent, I believe. I think people know my intentions. I think people know the direction of my business. I think they know what I'm trying to achieve, et cetera, et cetera. And then down to the very most personal level, right? Individual self-defense. Yeah, I believe you should be lethal, but you should always look for peaceful resolutions first. Yeah, always. And attempt to have some mutual respect for other people, even if you believe differently. I say again, even if you believe differently, have a mutual human respect for other people so that you trust that you can interact with these people without any coercion and that they're interacting with you without any coercion. Trust is a thing there. All right. So moving on to the next sort of topic. And again, this ties in very well with the last episode. Abuse and misuse of the non-aggression principle. And we're going to talk about protesters. We're going to talk about these community organizer, what is told to us to be grassroots efforts to protest a thing. Usually it's just to protest Donald Trump and anything Donald Trump has got his hands on. But and it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous to frame your actions up on the surface as non-aggressive, but then try to subtly escalate tensions, such as standing in front of a Now, look, folks, I believe we should abolish most government agencies, most. But if you're standing in front of and I mean impeding their forward progress while they are executing what is legal duties, folks, whether you like the legality of it or not, or if you're if there's 2 or 3 agents standing around doing their thing and you don't like the thing they're doing, and you got 30, 40 people surrounding 2 or 3 guys, what you're setting the conditions for bad things to happen. And I guess if you're willing to be a martyr in that situation, I guess drive on. But if you're not willing to be a martyr in that situation, then you're going in because it's designed to create an overreaction so that then someone can catch it on video and then say, see, look how evil these guys are. But here's what I can say sort of about the government agencies and the dudes and the cops even. At the ground level, generally speaking, ground level dudes are good dudes just doing what their job is. And maybe they have and maybe they haven't put a lot of deep philosophical thought into what their job is. They're just out executing we do this, we do immigration enforcement, so that's what we're doing. And then they're getting accosted by all these folks under the guise of peaceful protests. Okay. The agency and the organization is one thing. The larger agency and the doctrine of the larger agency and the decision makers at that level, and then even the, executive level, that's one thing. But then the guys out executing, that's another thing. Now, I will always critique the level of training that many, many, many of these men have, and women, based on the things you see on the video, various videos. I'm not talking about one in particular. I'm just saying there's a lot of, you can see a lack of training in the way they go hands-on or the way they attempt or not to de-escalate, or their gun handling skills, or any of those, or their defensive tactics, or anything like that. I think training is lacking in general, and it's hard to train for these very spontaneous and weird, baited interactions. But you see that if you bastardize the non-aggression principle for some kind of appearance of having the moral high ground, that's eventually going to bite you in the ass. It's going to bite you in the ass. And look, the question is about some of these grassroots organizations. The question is, are they grassroots or are they being funded by nefarious parties and just being manipulated and being what's the word? Radicalized. Yeah, that's it. Radicalized with propaganda that you get from all the socials and their social media bubbles and all the things, man. We talk about all this stuff all the time. But as it relates to the non-aggression principle, if you're using non-aggression to incite violence, then is that non-aggression at all? If you're trying to incite an overreaction from a guy who has a firearm and then somebody gets murdered, well, you've achieved a strategic objective, haven't you? And if you're willing to sacrifice someone else's life to achieve a strategic objective in your hyper-partisan world, that's not the non-aggression principle at all. No, that's not at all it. And then there's property, right? What did we see during the riots several years ago where they were destroying literal city blocks and businesses and everything? Yeah, there is once a Molotov cocktail is thrown, the whole movement is discredited, in my opinion. This manufactured indignant behavior, nobody's more against government overreach than me. But by doing equal and opposite of the thing that you're claiming you don't like, you're a hypocrite. That's it. You simply can't claim to be adhering to non-aggression and being peaceful protesters while inciting, intentionally creating a situation that logically will lead to an overreaction or violence. Now, that's where I sort of lean on the training of these agents and these ground level, tactical level dudes. You should be held to a higher standard. But the reality is you have qualified immunity for most things. And then there's enough law out there that if somebody does something and you accidentally kill someone, you can still skirt by the law will still help you kind of get away with it. And the government that makes no pretense of the non-aggression principle. They are there to be aggressive. And I'll tell you a thing right now, as far as all this ICE stuff goes right now and border patrol and all, I think that the administration wants to project strength and wants to project force. I disagree with that tactic, but I don't disagree that illegal immigrants need to be deported. I don't disagree with that. I think the way it's happening is the wrong tactic, is what I think. But yeah, people who disagree with me, one guy says, well, what about Laken Riley? And what about, and you start naming off all these young ladies that were murdered by some illegal criminal. And I'm not discounting that at all. I'm not saying that those dudes don't need to face justice. I'm saying, what does that have to do with murdering protesters? All right, damn. And whether or not a protester has it coming. Look, if you incite violence, you got it coming. But nobody deserves the death penalty for unless you aim to cause death. Nobody deserves the death penalty for being an asshole. So if you're on board with all the protesters inciting and provoking all these agents, you may as well. I mean, go out there and do it yourself. Put yourself in the way, so that you might be the one that catches a bullet or 2 or 10. Otherwise, think critically and understand that using the non-aggression principle as a moral shield is incorrect and wrong, just like unnecessary use of lethal violence is wrong. All right, damn. Okay, should I continue on? Let's see. Nah, I don't want to continue all that. All right, I will a little bit. These look, if they're out there coordinating all these blockades, right, and you're trying to physically block, whether or not you think a warrant is valid or not, that's not for you, right? That's not for you. You go challenge that in court, or you go challenge it some. Well, that don't stop them from getting picked up today. Yeah, you're right. Well, question why you think illegals. Now, look, propaganda aside. If an illegal alien, never mind criminal history, should be deported. An illegal criminal for sure should be deported. Well, yeah, deported and then face charges. But will that happen? Who knows? But if you're causing propaganda, if you're throwing bricks and rocks and shit like that at government vehicles, there's no pretense of nonviolence there. That's not peaceful assembly at all. Just because you're calling something, aggression by the state, which it is aggression by the state, but unfortunately it's legal aggression by the state, and you're fighting the fight in the wrong arena. Out there on the street, you're fighting. Yeah, that looks good for social media. It looks good for the 6 o'clock news, but it's the wrong arena. Social media, any media, all the media amplifies this shit. They edit footage to make it look one-sided or the other side, whichever side they happen to be on. And then it just reinforces the hyperbolic propagandistic shit, right? There's already posters out there of what Now, I'm pretty sure it was a border agent or possibly DHS guy that shot that dude Preddy. But there's an image out there now, and it's a very compelling image that shows a guy who looks just like Preddy, kind of down and on the ground, and then it shows an agent standing over him, standing up straight and tall, pointing his gun at his head. And it's a very compelling image. And it may or may not win over a few hearts. But it's propaganda. It's excess. It's not doing anything to solve a problem. It's just adding fuel to the fire of the problem. And what is the problem, good people? Well, the root problem is ultimately Congress's failure to pass any kind of practical immigration reform. That's the real problem. But when your representative is on TV spewing a bunch of nonsense and they offer no practical solution, and then you go vote for them because they spew nonsense that you like to hear, you're setting up the conditions for this kind of shit to continue on. So it's not addressing a root cause. So all these protesters and all these anti-Trump type groups who come out under the guise of a non-aggression peaceful protest. Now, some guy on X put out he was a former Green Beret, or maybe current. He put out a very compelling post drawing all the comparisons with what's going on in Minnesota with actual insurgency structure that he dealt with in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, et cetera, et cetera. And that I've dealt with too. Most Green Berets will see a lot of these things and they will look very familiar. That is true. And that's what these organizers, they're going off a playbook. That is true. And if you deny that, you're either ignorant or willingly blind if you deny that. But my point to that is this. Is that illegal? Now, if you're a conservative, right-winger, MAGA type, do you believe that it's okay for you and your homies, your hunting buddies, to get together and form a little militia? And you go out and walk around open carrying with your 2A Molon Labe shirt on? Is that okay? Well, yeah, it is okay. And it's okay for these leftist groups to organize. That is okay. Do I think they're wrong? Yep, I do. But that don't mean that's not their natural right to do it. They have a freedom to assemble, right? Oh, well, they're a part of this Signal chat. Well, who ain't a part of a freaking Signal chat? Well, they organize and they have their little whistles and they use apps to highlight where ICE raids are going on. Well, I got news for you, good folks. If the tactics were different, they wouldn't know where these ICE raids were going on at. So either somebody's leaking information to these people, which is highly possible. These politicians are up there. They're nefarious, right? they ain't beyond leaking information. But just because this resembles an insurgency, it is not yet on a broader level. I don't think has breached any legal boundary. Now, obstructing justice or whatever it is, this some other people posted. So this guy Preddy, for instance, yes, I do not question one iota this dude's right to be carrying a firearm loaded with another magazine with an optic on it. I don't care if it's got a ported barrel or a compensator. I don't care if he had extended mags. That's his right to do it. And that guy, and because he's making bad decisions, whatever, that's bad. And when he broke the law, which he did, well, he made a bad decision to break the law. And then undertrained agents did what undertrained agents do. They overreact. It was a bad situation. But that dude had every right to look at his little app and go to wherever the little flash mob protest was, He had every right to stand on the sidelines and video. But when he stepped out into the middle of the road to obstruct or to step in between an agent, overreaction or not, to step in between an agent and the conduct of his duties, he broke the law. And by virtue of having a gun on you while you're breaking the law, that just doubles down. That just adds to your charges after that. So, folks, be very careful about the language around, this firearm situation. Because if you're a righty and you say he had no right to be out there protesting with a gun, you're slipping. You're slipping hard. And if you call yourself a 2A person, you're being inconsistent right now. Yep, that's the way it is. All right, never mind. All right, damn. Sorry. Now, that dude out there under the guise of the non-aggression principle, the minute he interjected himself into the situation, he violated non-aggression principle and thus was no longer at the moral high ground. Yep, that's it. I don't care how much of a caring nurse he was. If the only thing is, was he willing to risk his life to stop, this lady from getting snatched up and arrested? Yeah, he was, I guess. Did he think it was going to go that far? I don't know. Don't know what he was thinking exactly. So there's a line that legally, and that's what you got to worry. Look, morally or not, I said this. I said this on the last episode. I say it every now and again. The moral line and the legal line are in two different places. And just because it was morally correct don't mean it was legally correct. And guess what? That's what you're going to be judged on standing in a court of law, or you're just going to be murdered on the spot, which is not okay. It's not okay. But it happened anyway, didn't it? That poor guy is equally as dead, no matter what. No matter what his moral high ground was. And those agents probably won't get charged. I think legally speaking they won't. Unless they really pick apart that video that exposes that he got shot after he was disarmed. And that just again highlights the lack of training amongst that crew there. At any rate. Oh my gosh. All right. If the general public in America, generally speaking, adheres to the non-aggression principle, whether they really think they are or not by name, right? But they just, generally speaking, you leave other people alone. You don't violate other people's property or person. But then you see groups out there who are using what's called, they're saying we're nonviolent, right? But then the situation inevitably becomes violent. Then that's casting a shadow on the non-aggression principle. They're not casting the shadow on the people doing it, the violence. They're casting it on the principle itself. Look, these people were out doing non-aggression. Critical thinkers are going to look at that and they're going to see it as a deceptive tactic. And then sheep out there are going to look and say, oh, look, they were being non-aggressive and still. But it makes, advocating for non-aggression principle a bit more difficult from a libertarian's perspective when you got people out there using it as a goddamn political tactic, a physical political tactic. Because using it as a shield, yeah, you risk violence. You provoke overreaction. Innocent people can be killed. Protests look like a scene in some dystopian movie. And then guess what that does, good people? Guess what it does? Yep. Creates overreaction from the state. So what are they trying to do by talking about this guy had a gun? Some article said it was a military style gun. It was a pistol. It was a 320. Now, whether that gun might have went off by itself or not, it's a whole nother episode. But what that does, now the state's going to have an overreaction. And I say the state, I mean like the United States. And what is that? What does that look like? They conflate. So I commented on this to someone. If you guys know about the Cloward-Piven theory or the Cloward-Piven doctrine as it relates to government and like welfare, right? The doctrine kind of broadly and loosely states that if we, and I believe this is relevant to immigrants as well, if we bring in immigrants and put them all on welfare, and we have enough people in America, and not just immigrants, I mean like people out of work, unemployed, and stuff like that, that if they overwhelm that system to the degree that the system breaks under the pressure of all that weight, then they can institute absolute governmental control, even though that is a government system anyway. They believe that they can implement, kind of stricter total governmental control. Well, in comparison, if now, because what you're seeing a lot now is you got liberals who are out carrying guns. There are liberal, and I mean left-wing, colorful liberal types who are banding together in their own little gun clubs. And I'm here for it, folks. I'm here for it. But what that's doing is it's proliferating gun ownership, right? To the degree that, okay, gun ownership is not the domain of the right-wing Republicans at all. It's not the domain of libertarians. Libertarians, half of them are out there with all the guns, and then half of them are out there who are completely peacenik, hippie types. So libertarians are a very diverse group as well. But the peacenik libertarians don't begrudge the gun-owning libertarians, and vice versa. Okay, but now you got the extreme hard left who's out there advocating for guns too. And they're using incidents like this, in fact, and they're not wrong for it. So now that you can almost say, well, everybody's kind of on board with gun ownership now. And then we press these issues here. Well, let's go do a protest, instigate violence against the state, because that's what DHS and ICE and all those guys represent. They're representatives of the state. So, okay, hey, let's go incite violence against these guys while armed. Okay. And now you go and do this. And now guess what? Well, this guy was armed. And so next thing you know, somebody passes a law where you can't be at a protest. You can be legally armed and have a permit, but you're not allowed to go to a protest with it. Well, Edgar, rules like that already exist for schools and federal buildings and courthouses and blah, blah, blah. Well, to me, that's an overreach. There you go. So now you're just setting the stage for more overreach. So I believe I believe a part of this, a piece of this puzzle for a broader implication here is that let's advocate for guns, and then let's go out and that way we ensure guns are in these very dubious situations, and now we have justification to put stricter control on these guns. That's what I think. That's what I think. That's part of it's a piece of the puzzle. Is it the grand scheme? I don't know, but I believe it's a piece of the puzzle. And then politicians and media. You know what? I got sick of looking at social media today. Politicians and social media and the mainstream media, they exploit these incidents, folks. They exploit them. And some of them may take the moral high ground or may claim the moral high ground. They still exploit. You can be on the side of whichever side you want and still exploit that for your benefit, blaming your opponent for inciting the violence. And all that does is keep us polarized, keep us distracted, playing the blame game instead of looking at the underlying issues, which is what, folks? Yeah, for this particular past event, this Minnesota business, what's the underlying issue? It's immigration policy. It's got nothing to do with firearm ownership, where you can carry a gun at. Yeah. Manipulation of a non-aggression principle has bigger implications. That's all there is to it. And it might seem right at the moment for you. If you're a ground level, allegedly grassroots dude, and you're out there protesting ICE and protesting whoever, and then you're getting in their face and you're trying to, just because you throw your body, but you hold your hands up like, oh, I'm innocent, but you throw your body in front of someone, that's not a freebie. That's not a freebie. And all you're doing is putting more scrutiny on that tactic. And the broader implications are that ultimately we're going to lose more freedoms because of you. And the people funding all these they don't care because they're among the elites anyway. Oh man, yeah. All right, here we go, good people. We're going to wrap this business. Non-aggression principle. It's good. It's solid. It's rock solid. It should be adhered to in all aspects of life, to include big level politics, to include the enforcement of law. So, good people, be a critical thinker. Question everything you see and ask. Yeah, use the non-aggression principle as a metric. Okay, well, did this dude in this incident, at what point, where was the non-aggression principle violated? And be critical about that. And look and see where the breakdown was. And this one I say all the time, and I'm going to say it again. Apply standards of behavior equally to all sides of an issue. Don't allow your side, because you believe you have moral ground, to behave any worse than what you think the bad guys are. Hold protesters and hold authorities equally accountable for escalation, and don't give one or the other a free pass based on ideology. At some point, someplace, you can find a breakdown of who was wrong. And a lot of situations are very ambiguous, good people. I know this. But you can find it. You can find it. You have to hold everyone, and I mean everyone, accountable for their individual actions, because a government agent don't get a free pass just because he was just doing his job either. Hold everyone accountable. And then for these agencies, not only the agencies, good people, but these community organizers, hold everybody equally transparent. Hold everybody equally transparent. You have to be the community organizers, just like the government. If you're organizing in the name of a cause, but you're employing thugs or outside paid agitators, but you're keeping all that, just making everybody out to be, oh no, these people are just organic. No, man, that's not good either. That's bad. That's not only bad, that's bad for your own, because once it comes out, it comes out. And then you look like an asshole, then your organization just changes names or changes uniforms. You wear a different T-shirt to your next protest. Yeah, we know the government agencies need to be held accountable, and they're often not. But so do the organization, the community organizers. Don't allow your side to behave any worse than you expect of the other side. Don't allow your side to cross ethical boundaries that you ain't willing to allow the other side to cross. Don't allow your side to use something as universal as a non-aggression principle, to use it as a weapon when we're in these hyperpolarized friggin' disputes about things. And here it is, folks. It comes all the way back to this. Take personal responsibility, whether you're an activist or whether you're a law enforcement agent. Take personal responsibility for your actions. Choose actions that uphold not only the non-aggression principle, but uphold individual rights. And while you're holding yourself responsible, yes, call out manipulations and coercions that twist the situation for the worst, or for the worse. Yeah. Be individually responsible, even if you're a stormtrooper. Have some individual responsibility. Don't be the guy that pulls the trigger on an innocent person. If your partner does it, that don't make it okay. That means you call him out. And then be honest about it. And the same goes for your activist. That's it, folks. Individual responsibility. Take individual responsibility and practice the non-aggression principle in your daily life, whatever level of life that is, whether it's in your house in the morning with your wife, all the way up to your political activism or your government stormtrooper job. Yeah, practice the non-aggression principle and uphold individual rights. That's what I got, good people. All right. Please follow us on all the socials. OspreyShootingSolutions.com, twoteamguys.com, thejuntopodcast.com, GiveSendGo /helpahomie.fund.com, SiloFTC.com. Go check all those out. We got good stuff going on all over the place. Good people, thank you for listening. I love you guys.